14 July, Paul Pelosi buys $5 million in chip stocks. 19th of July, Nancy attends a secret meeting. 2 August, historic visit to Taiwan. 15th August, stocks surge 28%. Is this a coincidence? Paul Pelosi was staring at his Bloomberg terminal that morning, coffee growing cold in his mug. The numbers on the screen showed NVIDIA trading at 161.42, down 3% from the previous day. The entire semiconductor sector was bleeding red. China's threats against Taiwan were spooking investors, and smart money was fleeing chip stocks like rats from a sinking ship. But Paul wasn't looking at what everyone else was seeing. He was waiting for something. From the next room, he could hear Nancy on the phone. Her voice was low, careful, but after 59 years of marriage, he knew when she was discussing something significant. Words drifted through the mahogany door: semiconductor autonomy, strategic reserves, August timeline. The call lasted 17 minutes. Paul knew because he had been timing it. Nancy entered the kitchen with that practiced smile she wore like armor. "Morning, honey," she said, pouring herself green tea. Her morning ritual unchanged for decades. But today, something was different. Her fingers drummed against the counter. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Her tell. "How's the market?" she asked casually, too casually. "Brutal," Paul replied, not looking up from his screen. "Tech sector's getting hammered, especially chips. NVIDIA is down 18% this month alone." Nancy moved behind him, placed a hand on his shoulder. From anyone else, it would be a gesture of comfort. From her, it was something else entirely. "Maybe that's an opportunity," she said softly. Paul's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "You think?" "I think," Nancy said, sipping her tea, "that sometimes the market overreacts to political theater. And sometimes," she paused, choosing her words like a surgeon selecting instruments, "sometimes what looks like escalation is actually negotiation." That was all she said. She didn't need to say more. Within an hour, Paul Pelosi had placed an order for 25,000 call options of NVIDIA stock worth exactly $5.3 million. The options had a strike price of $165, expiring in September. To any observer, it looked like a massive bet against market sentiment. To those who knew how to read between the lines, it looked like something else entirely. The story might have ended there. Just another wealthy investor making a contrarian play. But 3 days later, something happened that would transform this routine trade into a scandal that would shake the foundations of Congress. Marcus Chen had been investigating congressional stock trades for the Better Markets Foundation for 3 years. He'd seen it all: senators buying defense stocks before military contracts, representatives shorting airlines before COVID announcements. But what he discovered on July 19th made him push back from his desk and whistle low. "Holy shit," he muttered, staring at his screen. His algorithm had flagged an unusual pattern. Nancy Pelosi's office had scheduled a constituent meeting for 3 p.m. that day, normal enough. But cross-referencing with security logs, he found something interesting. The meeting included 3 individuals: James Morrison, CEO of Applied Materials; Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, and a third name that made Chen's blood run cold: David Wei, Taiwan's unofficial economic representative to the United States. This wasn't a constituent meeting. This was a war council. Chen immediately pulled up Paul Pelosi's trading records. There it was. The massive NVIDIA position, purchased just 5 days before this secret summit. He grabbed his phone and called his editor. "You need to see this," he said. "I think I've found something big." His editor, Sarah Martinez, was skeptical. "Another congressional trade." "Marcus, we've published dozens of these. Nobody cares anymore. This is different," Chen insisted. "This isn't just insider trading, this is geopolitical insider trading. She's using classified foreign policy information to make market plays. You can prove that. I can prove the timeline. The rest," Chen paused. "The rest is going to require some digging." Martinez sighed. "You have 48 hours. If you can't find a smoking gun by then, we move on." Chen hung up and got to work. He didn't know it yet, but he had just started pulling on a thread that would unravel one of the biggest scandals in American political history. The meeting on July 19th took place in a secure conference room in the Rayburn House office building. No phones were allowed, no recordings. But what people forget is that in Washington, secrets are currency, and someone always talks. That someone was a junior staffer named Amanda Torres, who was tasked with preparing briefing materials for the meeting. She wasn't in the room, but she saw the documents, and what she saw made her question everything she believed about public service. The briefing was titled, Pacific Semiconductor Security Initiative. In dry bureaucratic language, it outlined a plan that would reshape the global technology landscape. The key points: the U.S. would signal strong support for Taiwan's semiconductor industry through a high-profile diplomatic visit. In response to the visit, China would issue threats but take no concrete action. Congress would fast-track the KIPAS Act, providing $52 billion in subsidies to semiconductor manufacturers. Companies with strong Taiwan partnerships would see immediate market gains. At the bottom of the briefing in small print was a timeline. August 2nd was circled in red. Amanda photocopied the document before shredding it, as instructed. She told herself she was just being thorough, keeping a backup in case questions arose later. But deep down, she knew why she really did it. Because something about this felt wrong. Nancy Pelosi stood at the head of the table, her voice commanding despite her diminutive frame. "Gentlemen, what we discuss here doesn't leave this room. Are we clear?" The three men nodded. Jensen Huang spoke first. "Madam Speaker, NVIDIA's position is precarious. We're dependent on Taiwan for our most advanced chips. If China moves, China won't move," Nancy interrupted. "Not if we play this correctly." David Wei leaned forward. "With respect, Speaker Pelosi, you're gambling with my country's security." Nancy's eyes flashed. "No, David, I'm ensuring it. A public show of support from the United States, particularly from Congress, will make Beijing think twice, and the market response will demonstrate to the world that Taiwan is too valuable to threaten." James Morrison of Applied Materials nodded slowly. "The market does need reassurance. Our stock is down 30% on invasion fears." "Exactly," Nancy said. "Which is why timing is everything. I'll make the visit in August, public, high-profile, defiant. China will bluster, but they won't act. And when the dust settles, our stocks recover," Huang finished. Nancy smiled. "Your stocks soar. Congress passes the KIPAS Act with bipartisan support. American semiconductor independence becomes a national priority. Everyone wins, except," Wei said quietly, "if you're wrong about China." The room fell silent. Nancy walked to the window, looking out at the Capitol dome. "I've been in this game for 40 years, David. I know exactly how far we can push without breaking. Trust me." But trust, as they would all soon learn, was a luxury none of them could afford. Ryan O'Brien had been Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff for 6 years, but he'd never seen her like this. She was pacing her office, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in urgent tones. "No, that's not acceptable," she said. "The announcement needs to come from my office, not state, because this is a congressional delegation, not an executive branch initiative. Yes, I understand the risks." She hung up and turned to Ryan. "Clear my schedule for August 2nd through 4th. Mon, I'm going to Taiwan." Ryan felt his stomach drop. "Speaker, that's..." "The Chinese have explicitly warned against." "The Chinese can go to hell," Nancy snapped. Then, composing herself, "This is about American leadership in the Pacific. If we show weakness now, we lose the semiconductor race for a generation. Does the president know?" Nancy's smile was sharp as a blade. "The president will be informed at the appropriate time." Ryan knew better than to push further. But as he left her office, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Nancy Pelosi didn't make impulsive decisions. Every move was calculated, every risk weighed. So why announce a Taiwan trip now, when tensions were at their highest in decades? The answer came to him that night as he reviewed her financial disclosures, a routine part of his job. They're buried in subsection 3. A.2 was Paul Pelosi's NVIDIA trade. Ryan stared at the number, $5.3 million. The timestamp showed the trade was executed on July 14th, 5 days before the secret semiconductor meeting. "Oh, Nancy," he whispered. "What have you done?" Back at the Better Markets Foundation, Marcus Chen was connecting dots at breakneck speed. He'd managed to confirm the July 19th meeting through multiple sources. He'd documented Paul Pelosi's trades. Now he needed the smoking gun, proof that Nancy had shared classified information with her husband. That proof came from an unexpected source. Chen's phone rang at 11 p.m. Unknown number. "Mr. Chen, you don't know me, but I know you've been investigating congressional trading. I have information you need to see." "Who is this?" "Someone who believes in transparency. Check your encrypted email in 10 minutes. The line went dead. 10 minutes later, Chen was staring at an email that would change everything. Attached were photos of documents, clearly taken in haste. The header read, "Pacific Semiconductor Security Initiative." His hands shook as he read. This wasn't just insider trading. This was using classified intelligence to manipulate markets. And at the center of it all was the Speaker of the House. On July 28th, as Nancy Pelosi's plane prepared for its Pacific journey, Paul Pelosi met with his financial advisor, Gregory Marsh, at their usual spot, a private room at the St. Francis Yacht Club. "You seem confident," Marsh observed, reviewing Paul's positions. "NVIDIA's still down. The whole sector is panicking about Taiwan." Paul swirled his scotch. "Markets overreact. They always have. 5 million is a big bet on that theory." "It's not a bet," Paul said quietly. "It's an investment in American strength." Marsh raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like something your wife would say." Paul's face remained neutral. "Nancy and I have been married 59 years. Some habits rub off." But Marsh had been managing money for the wealthy long enough to read between the lines. "Paul, I have to ask, is there something you know that the market doesn't?" Paul set down his glass carefully. "Greg, I read the same reports everyone else does. Taiwan is critical to the semiconductor supply chain. America won't let it fall. That's not inside information, that's geopolitical reality. And if your wife visits Taiwan..." Paul smiled. "Greg, you know Nancy. Nobody tells her where she can or can't go. If she decides to visit Taiwan, it'll be because she believes it's the right thing to do. Not because of any stock position." Marsh nodded slowly. The conversation was being recorded, as all their meetings were, for compliance purposes. Paul knew this. His answers were perfect, legally bulletproof, ethically gray. As Paul left the yacht club, his phone buzzed. A text from Nancy. "Wheels up in 72 hours. Love you." He typed back, "Be safe. Love you too." Then he opened his trading app and checked NVIDIA's after-hours price. Still down. But not for long. The news broke on August 1st. CNN's banner screamed on Pelosi. Within minutes, the semiconductor sector exploded. NVIDIA jumped 7% in pre-market trading. By the opening bell, it was up 12%. Paul Pelosi's options were already deep in the money. But in a nondescript office building in Washington, Marcus Chen was preparing his own bombshell. He'd spent days verifying every detail, cross-referencing every source. His editor, Sarah Martinez, had given him the green light. "You're absolutely sure about this?" she asked one final time. "I have the documents, the timeline, the trades, and 3 sources confirming the July 19th meeting," Chen replied. "This is solid. And legal? I've run it by counsel. We're good." Martinez took a deep breath. "Then let's publish." At 2 p.m. Eastern. As Nancy Pelosi's plane crossed into Taiwanese airspace, the Better Markets Foundation published Chen's investigation under the headline, "The Speaker's Gambit: How Nancy Pelosi Turned Foreign Policy into Family Profit." The article was meticulous, laying out the timeline in damaging detail. July 14e. Paul Pelosi purchases 5.3 million NVIDIA options. July 19e. Nancy Pelosi meets secretly with semiconductor executives and Taiwan representative. July 28. Nancy announces Taiwan visit. August 20 visit occurs. Stocks soar. August 50. Paul Pelosi's position worth 8.1 million, a 53% gain within an hour. The story was everywhere. Fox News led with it. Twitter exploded. Congressional Republicans called for investigations. Even some Democrats privately expressed concern. But Nancy Pelosi was 7,000 miles away, standing on a stage in Taipei shaking hands with President Tsai Ing-wen. She wouldn't see the story for another 6 hours. When she did, her response would set off a chain of events that nobody could have predicted. Ryan O'Brien was the one who had to break the news. He waited until Nancy was back at her hotel, then knocked on her door. "We have a problem," he said, handing her his tablet. Nancy read in silence, her face a mask. When she finished, she handed the tablet back. "Get me a secure line to Hakeem Jeffries and draft a statement. I'll review it in an hour." "Nancy, this is serious. The ethics committee will. The ethics committee will find exactly what we allow them to find," Nancy said coldly. "No go." But Ryan noticed something he'd never seen before in his boss's eyes. Fear. Back in San Francisco, Paul Pelosi was having lunch at his club when his lawyer, David Sterling, arrived looking grim. "We need to talk," Sterling said. Privately. They moved to a secure room. Sterling didn't mince words. "Paul, they have documents from a classified briefing. If Nancy shared any information from that briefing with you..." "She didn't," Paul said firmly. "Paul, I'm your attorney. I need the truth." Paul met his eyes. "David, my wife and I have been together for nearly 6 decades. We don't need words to communicate. She didn't tell me anything. She didn't have to." Sterling sat back. "That's a beautiful sentiment. It's also not a legal defense. Then what do you suggest? Dump the position. Today. Take the profit and donate it to charity. Make this go away. Paul shook his head. That would be an admission of guilt. We did nothing wrong. Paul, perception is reality in Washington. And right now, the perception is that you and Nancy ran an insider trading scheme using classified intelligence. Paul's phone buzzed. A text from Nancy. Hold the line, don't sell. Trust me. He showed it to Sterling, who went pale. Paul, that text could be evidence of conspiracy. But Paul just smiled. Or it could be evidence of a wife supporting her husband's investment decisions. Interpretation is everything. David. The House Ethics Committee announced an investigation on August 5th. The committee chair, Susan Wild, tried to keep it low-key, but the media frenzy made that impossible. Every financial news channel led with the story. The hashtag #FapePelosiinsidergate trended globally. Nancy returned from Taiwan to a changed landscape. Her Democratic colleagues were nervous. Her Republican opponents smelled blood. And somewhere in the Department of Justice, career prosecutors were quietly opening their own files. She called an emergency meeting of her inner circle on August 8th. Present were Ryan O'Brien, her lawyer Barbara Olson, her communications director Ray Zaccaro, and surprisingly, her husband Paul. Options? Nancy said simply. Olson spoke first. Legally you're exposed but not fatally. The meeting on July 19th was technically within your oversight duties. The trading happened through Paul, creating a buffer. But the timeline is damaging. And if they find any communication between you and Paul about the Taiwan trip before the trades. Nancy turned to Ray. Media strategy. Tough sell. Ray admitted. The narrative is set. Corrupt speaker uses inside information for personal gain. We can muddy the waters, but we can't change the story. Ryan? Her chief of staff looked uncomfortable. Honestly, I think you should consider stepping down as speaker. Take the hit, protect the caucus. Live to fight another day. The room went silent. Nancy's face was stone. Then Paul spoke. Note, everyone turned to him. Nancy's done nothing wrong, he continued. I made an investment decision based on public information and my own analysis. If we retreat now, we validate their lies. Nancy reached over and took his hand. The question is, can we prove that? We don't have to prove innocence. Olson interjected. They have to prove guilt. But everyone in the room knew that in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already in. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On August 12th, Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, gave an interview to CNBC. When asked about the Pelosi trades, he said something that changed the narrative. Look, everyone in Silicon Valley knew Taiwan tensions were overblown. We'd been telling investors for months that the geopolitical risk was priced in. Anyone who bought our stock in July was making a smart contrarian play, nothing more. The interviewer pressed. But the timing with Speaker Pelosi's visit? Huang shrugged. Coincidence. We'd been planning increased Taiwan cooperation since January. The speaker's visit was helpful, but hardly determinative. It was a lifeline, and Nancy grabbed it with both hands. Her office immediately released a statement highlighting Huang's comments, framing Paul's trades as prescient market analysis, not insider information. But Marcus Chen wasn't buying it. He'd been digging deeper, and what he found sent chills down his spine. Going through SEC filings, he discovered something odd. 3 other congressional spouses had made similar semiconductor trades in the same July window. All were Democrats. All were in Nancy's inner circle. This wasn't just insider trading. This was a conspiracy. Chen called his editor. Sarah, I need more resources. This is bigger than just Pelosi. How much bigger? I think there's a whole network. Congressional spouses, coordinating trades based on classified briefings. Pelosi's just the tip of the iceberg. Sarah whistled. Can you prove it? Give me 2 weeks. You've got one. As Chen worked frantically to connect the dots, Nancy Pelosi was fighting for her political life. The ethics committee had subpoenaed her phone records, her emails, and her calendar. Her lawyers were working overtime to claim executive privilege, but the walls were closing in. On August 20th, she made a decision that shocked everyone. She called a press conference. Standing before a room of reporters, Nancy Pelosi did something she'd never done in 40 years of politics. She showed vulnerability. My husband and I have been together for 59 years. She began, her voice softer than usual. In that time, we've built a life, a family, and yes, a financial portfolio. Paul is a brilliant investor. He's been trading stocks since before I entered politics. The suggestion that I would compromise my oath of office, that I would share classified information for personal gain, is not just false, it's insulting. To me, to my husband, and to the institution I've served my entire adult life. A reporter shouted, "Will you release all communications between you and your husband from July?" Nancy's mask slipped for just a second, showing steel beneath. "I'll release whatever the ethics committee requires, nothing more, nothing less. But if you have nothing to hide—" "I have nothing to hide," Nancy snapped. "But I also have rights. Privacy rights that don't disappear because of a manufactured scandal." She left without taking more questions. The press conference was supposed to calm the waters. Instead, it poured gasoline on the fire. That night, Amanda Torres, the junior staffer who'd photocopied the classified briefing, watched the press conference from her studio apartment. She'd been following the scandal obsessively, waiting for someone to uncover what she knew. But as days passed and the full truth remained hidden, her conscience began to gnaw at her. She had evidence that could blow the entire thing open. But using it would end her career, possibly land her in jail for mishandling classified information. She pulled out the photocopied briefing, stared at it for the 100th time. At the bottom, in Nancy Pelosi's handwriting, was a note she hadn't noticed before. "Injure PP. Understands timing. PP Paul Pelosi." Amanda's hands shook. This was it. Proof that Nancy had intended to share information with her husband. She had a choice to make. Stay silent and let the powerful protect each other, or speak truth to power and face the consequences. She reached for her phone. Marcus Chen was pulling an all-nighter when his encrypted phone rang. Same unknown number as before. "Mr. Chen, I'm ready to go on record. But I need protection." His heart raced. "Who are you?" "Someone who was in the room where it happened. I have documents. Real ones. Can you meet?" They arranged to meet at a 24-hour diner in Arlington. Chen arrived to find a nervous young woman in a Georgetown law hoodie. "Amanda Torres," she said, sliding into the booth. "I worked for Speaker Pelosi." She told him everything. The meeting, the briefing, the handwritten note. Then she slid a manila envelope across the table. Chen opened it carefully. His eyes widened as he read. This was it, the smoking gun. "This could destroy you," he said quietly. "I know," Amanda replied. "But I can't live with staying silent. This isn't about Republican or Democrat. It's about right and wrong." Chen studied her face. "Why now?" "Because they're going to get away with it," she said. "Unless someone stops them." The story broke on August 25th. EXLUSI whistleblower reveals Pelosi's handwritten note linking classified intel to husband's trades. Within hours, it was the biggest political scandal in Washington. The photocopied briefing, with Nancy's handwritten note, was plastered across every news site. Legal experts weighed in. This was potential criminal conspiracy. Nancy Pelosi's office went dark. No statements, no responses. Behind the scenes, crisis management went into overdrive. Barbara Olson, Nancy's lawyer, was blunt. "This is bad. Really bad. The handwritten note creates direct link between classified information and Paul's trades. It's abbreviated." Nancy said desperately. "PP could mean anything." "Nancy, stop. No jury would buy that." The Speaker of the House sat in her office, looking older than her 84 years. "Options: resign, cooperate, maybe avoid prosecution." "Nancy," I said no. "I've survived worse than this." But even as she said it, she knew this was different. This wasn't about political survival anymore. This was about criminal liability. The Department of Justice moved faster than anyone expected. On August 30th, FBI agents arrived at the Pelosi home in San Francisco with a search warrant. They were professional, courteous, and thorough. They took computers, phones, documents, and boxes of financial records. Paul watched stone-faced as agents cataloged his trading records going back 5 years. His lawyer, David Sterling, was there within minutes. "Don't say anything," he advised. But Paul had already made up his mind. As the agents prepared to leave, he spoke up. "Agent Martinez, I'd like to make a statement." Sterling grabbed his arm. "Paul, no." Paul shook him off. "I've been trading stocks for 40 years. Every trade I've ever made has been based on public information and my own analysis. My wife has never, not once, shared classified information with me." Agent Martinez, a veteran of financial crimes, studied him. "Mr. Pelosi, you're not under arrest. But I strongly advise you to speak with your attorney before making any statements." "I've said what I needed to say." As the FBI convoy pulled away, neighbors gathered on the sidewalk. Phones out, recording everything. By evening, Pelosi raided was trending worldwide. Inside the house, Nancy and Paul sat in their living room, the weight of 5 decades of marriage and ambition pressing down on them. "I'm sorry," Nancy said quietly. Paul took her hand. "We're in this together. Always have been. They're going to come after you to get to me. Let them come. I've got nothing to hide." But both of them knew that in Washington, innocence was often irrelevant. The grand jury was convened in September. One by one, witnesses were called. Jensen Huang testified that his meeting with Pelosi was routine. David Way claimed diplomatic immunity. James Morrison took the fifth. But Amanda Torres was devastating. Under oath, she detailed the July 19th meeting, the classified briefing, and most damaging, Nancy's handwritten note. "In your opinion," the prosecutor asked, "what did PP stand for?" "Paul Pelosi," Amanda said clearly. The speaker often referred to her husband by his initials in internal communications. "And ensure PP understands timing." I believe she was instructing staff to make sure her husband understood when the Taiwan visit would occur. The grand jury room was silent. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was testimony from an insider under oath, directly implicating the Speaker of the House in sharing classified information for financial gain. Back in her office, Nancy Pelosi was meeting with House Democratic leadership. The mood was funereal. Hakeem Jeffries, her likely successor, was direct. "Nancy, the caucus is hemorrhaging. We've got members calling for your resignation. The president won't take your calls. It's over." Nancy's eyes flashed. "Nothing's over until I say it's over. With respect, that's not your call anymore. If you don't step down voluntarily, there will be a vote of no confidence." The betrayal stung more than any FBI raid. These were her people, her allies, her legacy. And they were abandoning her. "You ungrateful," she started. Nancy, Steny Hoyer, her oldest ally, interrupted gently. "You've had an incredible run. Don't let it end in disgrace. Step down. For the party. For your family. For yourself." Nancy looked around the room. Not a single supportive face. Even her most loyal deputies were avoiding eye contact. "I'll think about it," she said finally. But everyone knew she'd already decided. The indictment came down on October 15th, United States v. Nancy Pelosi and Paul Pelosi. The charges: conspiracy to commit securities fraud, insider trading, and misuse of classified information. Nancy was in her office when the news broke. She'd known it was coming, but seeing it in black and white still hit like a physical blow. Her phone rang. "Paul, I just saw," he said. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Hey," he said gently. "For better or worse, remember, we'll fight this together." But Nancy knew the fight was already lost. Not in court. They had good lawyers, constitutional defenses, procedural arguments. But in the arena that mattered most to her, public opinion. She called a final press conference for October 20th. The press room was packed, anticipation electric. Everyone expected defiance, the fierce Nancy Pelosi who'd stood up to presidents and never backed down. Instead, they got something else. Nancy entered slowly, looking every one of her 84 years. She approached the podium, gripped it for support, and began to speak. 40 years ago, I came to Congress with a simple mission: to fight for working families, to break barriers, to make this country more fair and more free. I've devoted my life to that mission. But public service requires public trust. And recent events have shattered that trust. While I maintain my innocence, while I know in my heart that I've done nothing wrong, I also know that my presence has become a distraction from the people's business. Therefore, effective immediately, I am resigning as Speaker of the House and from my seat in Congress." Gasps rippled through the room. This wasn't just stepping down from leadership. This was complete withdrawal from public life. "To my constituents in San Francisco, I apologize for leaving our work unfinished. To my colleagues in Congress, I'm sorry for the shadow this has cast on our institution. And to my family, especially my husband, Paul, I'm sorry for the pain this has caused. I will fight these charges in court. I will clear my name. But I will do so as a private citizen, not as a representative of the people." She looked directly into the cameras. "I've often said that power is not about what you have, but what you do with it. Today I use that power one last time, to step aside, to let new leaders emerge, to put country over self." She turned and walked away without taking questions. The last image of Nancy Pelosi in Congress was her back, straight but somehow smaller, disappearing through the door she'd entered as a young mother from California 4 decades earlier. In San Francisco, Paul Pelosi watched his wife's resignation on television. He'd offered to fly to Washington to stand beside her, but she'd refused. "This is my walk to take," she'd said. Now, alone in their Pacific Heights mansion, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power, he felt the weight of their choices crushing down. His phone rang. Their lawyer. "Paul, we need to discuss plea options." "No plea," Paul said firmly. "We're going to trial. Paul, the evidence is strong. If we could negotiate." "No, negotiation. We did nothing wrong." But even as he said it, Paul wondered if that was true. They'd followed the letter of the law mostly, but the spirit. Had they become so accustomed to the perks of power that they'd forgotten the obligations? He walked to his home office, looked at his Bloomberg terminal. NVIDIA was up another 3%. His options, if he still held them, would be worth over $10 million now. He picked up his phone and called his broker. "Sell everything," he said. "All of it, and donate the proceeds to charity." "Mr. Pelosi, are you sure?" "The tax implications." "I'm sure. Do it today. It wouldn't change anything legally. But somehow, it felt like the right thing to do." Marcus Chen won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the Pelosi scandal. But standing at the podium, accepting the award, he felt hollow. He'd exposed corruption, held power accountable, done everything a journalist was supposed to do. But in the wreckage of careers and reputations, he wondered if the truth had been worth the cost. Amanda Torres was in witness protection, her life appended for doing what she thought was right. Nancy Pelosi, whatever her faults, had been an effective leader brought low by greed. And the system that enabled it all, still intact, still corrupt, just with different players. "This award," Chen said to the audience, "belongs not to me, but to those brave enough to speak truth to power, no matter the personal cost. And to the American people, who deserve leaders worthy of their trust." Applause filled the room, but Chen barely heard it. He was thinking about Amanda Torres somewhere in hiding, paying the price for his prize. The trial began in January. Nancy and Paul Pelosi, side by side at the defense table, looked like what they were. An elderly couple facing the fight of their lives. The prosecution's case was methodical, devastating. They presented the timeline, the documents, Amanda Torres's testimony via video link. They showed how Paul's trades aligned perfectly with Nancy's classified briefings. They painted a picture of entitlement, of power corrupted. The defense fought back hard. They argued that Paul was a sophisticated investor who'd been trading tech stocks for decades. That Nancy's Taiwan trip had been planned for months, widely telegraphed. That correlation wasn't causation, but the handwritten note haunted them. And sure, PP understands timing. Nancy took the stand on the trial's 10th day. Against her lawyer's advice, she'd insisted on testifying. "Mrs. Pelosi," the prosecutor began, "did you write this note?" Nancy looked at the projected image of her handwriting. "Yes, and what does PP stand for?" Nancy hesitated. The courtroom held its breath. "Policy priorities," she said finally. "I wanted to ensure policy priorities were understood regarding timing." The prosecutor smiled coldly. "Policy priorities, not Paul Pelosi." "That's correct." "Mrs. Pelosi, in 40 years of public service, how many times have you abbreviated policy priorities as PP in your notes?" Nancy's silence was damning. The prosecutor continued, relentless. "Isn't it true that you regularly referred to your husband as PP in communications with staff?" "I don't recall." "You don't recall how you refer to your husband of 59 years? Nancy's composure finally cracked. "This is a witch hunt," she snapped. "You're twisting innocent actions into some grand conspiracy. I'm presenting evidence, Mrs. Pelosi, evidence that you used your position to enrich your family. I've served this country. Answer the question. Did PP mean Paul Pelosi?" Nancy looked at her husband, then back at the prosecutor. "No," she said firmly. "It did not." But nobody in the courtroom believed her. The verdict came on a gray February morning. The jury forewoman stood, paper trembling in her hands. On the charge of conspiracy to commit securities fraud, we find the defendant Nancy Pelosi guilty. On the charge of insider trading, we find the defendant Paul Pelosi guilty. On the charge of misuse of classified information, we find the defendant Nancy Pelosi guilty. The words echoed through the courtroom like funeral bells. Nancy didn't move, didn't react. She sat stone still, the weight of her fallen empire crushing down on her shoulders. Paul reached over, took her hand. For the first time in their marriage, it felt cold. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks later. They were released on bail, their passports surrendered. their movements monitored. The woman who once flew on military jets now needed permission to leave California. Outside the courthouse, protesters cheered. "Drain the swamp," they chanted. "No one's above the law." Nancy's motorcade pushed through the crowd. Inside the SUV, she finally spoke. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Paul. "We're not done," he said. "We'll appeal." But both new appeals were for legal battles. The war for their reputation was already lost. That night, in their Pacific Heights mansion, they sat in the kitchen where it all began. Where Nancy had mentioned Taiwan that July morning. Where Paul had made the trade that changed everything. Was it worth it? Paul asked quietly. Nancy looked out at the San Francisco Bay, lights twinkling on the water. "I spent 40 years building something, and I destroyed it in 40 days. That's not what I asked." She turned to him, tears finally coming. "No," she said, "nothing was worth this." The national reaction was swift and brutal. Republicans called for maximum sentences. Democrats distanced themselves, erasing Nancy from websites and donor lists. The woman who'd been the most powerful Democrat in America was now politically radioactive. But the real damage was deeper. In focus groups across the country, trust in government hit new lows. "If Pelosi can do it, they're all doing it," became the common refrain. Marcus Chun wrote a follow-up piece examining the broader implications. Since his initial report, 17 other congressional spouses had quietly divested suspicious positions. The swamp wasn't drained, it just got better at hiding. The Pelosi scandal, Chen wrote, represents not an aberration but a revelation. Washington's elite have always traded on inside information. The only difference now is we caught one. 3 weeks before sentencing, something unexpected happened. Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO, requested a meeting with prosecutors. What he revealed would add another twist to an already serpentine tale. "I need to correct my testimony," Huang said, flanked by lawyers. "When I said our July meeting with Speaker Pelosi was routine, that wasn't entirely accurate." The prosecutors leaned forward. "The Speaker," Huang continued, "explicitly told us she would ensure congressional support for the KISS Act if we maintained our Taiwan partnerships through any diplomatic tensions. She said, and I quote, 'The market will reward those who show confidence.' Why didn't you mention this before?" Huang shifted uncomfortably. "Because I benefited too. My personal holdings increased by 200 million after her Taiwan visit. I thought we were all just playing the game." This new testimony was damning. It showed Nancy hadn't just shared information. She'd actively coordinated market manipulation with corporate executives. When Nancy's lawyers heard about Huang's reversal, they knew it was over. Any hope of leniency at sentencing evaporated. "He's trying to save himself by burning you," Barbara Olson told Nancy. Nancy laughed bitterly. "The Washington way. I taught him well." Amanda Torres watched the news from her undisclosed location. The FBI had moved her 3 times after death threats. Her career in politics was over before it began. Her law school loans still demanded payment, but no firm would touch the woman who brought down the Speaker. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Every time she thought about staying silent, she remembered that briefing, that note, that sick feeling in her stomach when she realized what was happening. Her handler knocked. "Ms. Torres, there's someone here to see you." Amanda tensed. Visitors weren't supposed to know this location. But the woman who entered wasn't a threat. It was Christine Pelosi, Nancy's daughter. "I shouldn't be here," Christine said. "Then why are you?" Christine sat down heavily. "Because someone should say it. What you did took courage. My mother, she lost her way. Power does that. But you reminded us that truth still matters." Amanda felt tears coming. "I destroyed your family, no," Christine said firmly. "My mother's choices did that. You just refused to be complicit." They sat in silence for a moment. "She still thinks she did nothing wrong," Christine added quietly. "Even now, facing prison, she believes she was just playing by unwritten rules everyone follows." "Maybe she's right," Amanda said. "Maybe everyone does do it. That doesn't make it acceptable. That makes it worse." Sentencing day arrived with spring rain. Nancy and Paul Pelosi entered the courthouse for the last time as free citizens. The gallery was packed. Reporters, politicians, citizens who'd traveled across the country to witness history. Judge Sarah Henderson, a Carter appointee known for fairness, looked down at the defendants. "Mrs. Pelosi, Mr. Pelosi, you've been convicted of serious crimes. Crimes that strike at the heart of public trust. As Speaker of the House, Mrs. Pelosi, You held one of the highest offices in our democracy. With that power came responsibility. Responsibility you violated for personal gain. Nancy stood straight, defiant even now. The evidence showed a clear pattern. Classified information flowed from secure briefings to private trading accounts. Millions in profits were generated from the people's business. This wasn't a momentary lapse. It was systematic corruption. The judge paused, consulting her notes. However, the court also recognizes decades of public service, the defendant's age and health, the likelihood of recidivism. These factors weigh in sentencing. Hope flickered in Paul's eyes. Nancy Patricia Pelosi, I sentence you to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years supervised release. You are further barred from trading securities for life. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Prison time for an 84-year-old former speaker was unprecedented. Paul Francis Pelosi, I sentence you to 12 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years supervised release. You are also permanently barred from securities trading. Paul gripped the defense table for support. Defendants will be remanded immediately to begin serving their sentences. Your Honor. Barbara Olson stood quickly. We request defendants remain free pending appeal. Denied. The jury's verdict was clear. Bailiffs, please take the defendants into custody. What happened next would be replayed endlessly on news channels. Nancy Pelosi, the woman who'd stood up to presidents, who'd wielded the speaker's gavel with iron authority, was handcuffed in open court. As the bailiffs approached, she turned to Paul. I love you, she mouthed. Always, he replied. Then they were led away in different directions. Nancy to a women's facility in Dublin, California. Paul to a minimum security camp in Lompoc. The most powerful couple in San Francisco was now just 2 more federal inmates. Prison changed Nancy Pelosi, not in the dramatic, redemptive way movies suggest, but in small, grinding ways that stripped away decades of carefully constructed persona. Her cell was 8 by 10 feet. Her schedule was dictated by others. Her meals were whatever the kitchen served. The woman who'd commanded armies of staff now cleaned toilets for commissary money. She wrote letters to Paul daily. He was in a different facility, but their lawyers arranged monthly calls. How are you holding up? Paul asked during one call. I'm fine, Nancy lied. She'd lost 20 pounds. Her arthritis was worse without proper care. But complaining felt like weakness. Nancy, I said I'm fine. How are you? Paul was struggling too, but differently. The camp was minimum security, filled with white-collar criminals. Some respected him, others blamed him for their own falls. I've been thinking, he said carefully. When we get out, maybe we should leave. Start over somewhere. Europe, maybe. Somewhere people don't know us. Nancy's silence stretched long. The idea of Nancy Pelosi running from anything was antithetical to her nature. But what was left to fight for? We'll see, she said finally. Marcus Chen's book about the scandal, The Speaker's Gambit, became an instant bestseller. But success felt hollow. He'd won journalism's highest honors for destroying an old woman's life. He donated half his royalties to a fund for congressional staff whistleblowers. It felt like penance, though for what sin he wasn't sure. Telling the truth, or profiting from it. 60 Minutes came calling, wanting him to narrate a documentary. He declined. The story had been told, the damage done. What more was there to say? 8 months into Nancy's sentence, something shifted in Washington. A new insider trading scandal emerged, this time involving 3 Republican senators. The same patterns, the same corruption, just different jerseys. The public yawned. Pelosi had inoculated them. Everyone expected corruption now. Her fall hadn't cleaned up Washington. It had just normalized the dirt. In her cell, Nancy read about the new scandal with bitter satisfaction. See, she wanted to scream. I told you everyone does it? But there was no one to hear except her cellmate, a woman doing 5 years for tax evasion who didn't care about politics. Christine Pelosi visited monthly, bringing news from outside. Nancy's grandchildren were growing up. Her constituents had elected a progressive who was already making waves. Life went on without her. Mom, Christine said during one visit, have you thought about what you'll do when you get out? Nancy looked through the plexiglass partition. Your father wants to leave the country. That's not what I asked. Nancy was quiet. What does an 85-year-old disgraced politician do with her remaining years? Write memoirs nobody would believe. Give speeches nobody would book. I don't know, she admitted. It was the most honest thing she'd said in years. Paul was released first, his year complete. He emerged to find photographers waiting, shouting questions he didn't answer. The man who'd once commanded 9-figure deals now took an Uber home. The Pacific Heights mansion felt like a mausoleum. Every room held memories of power now lost. He considered selling but couldn't imagine Nancy coming home to somewhere else, so he waited, counted days, prepared for a reunion he both craved and dreaded. Nancy's release came on a foggy Thursday morning. No crowds this time. Her team had leaked false dates to avoid media circus. Only Christine waited in the parking lot. Nancy emerged looking smaller, grayer, but still holding herself straight. She'd served 14 months with good behavior. It felt like 14 years. "Hi, Mom," Christine said, voice thick. Nancy allowed one brief hug, then pulled back. "Where's your father?" "Home." He thought privacy would be better. Nancy nodded. Even now, after everything, she understood optics. The drive home was quiet. San Francisco looked the same but felt foreign. Her city, but not her city anymore. When they pulled up to the house, Paul was waiting on the steps. They looked at each other across decades of marriage, ambition, triumph, and catastrophe. He said simply. She replied. They went inside together, closed the door on the world that had watched them rise and fall. Inside, over coffee in their kitchen, they finally talked. Really talked. Not about appeals or vindication or comeback plans, but about what came next. "I'm tired, Paul," Nancy said. "Tired of fighting. Tired of defending, just tired. So we stop," Paul said. "We've got money still, not like before but enough. We could travel. See the grandchildren more." Lev quietly. Nancy stared into her cup. Nancy Pelosi living quietly. It seemed impossible. But what was the alternative? "The lawyers want to appeal," she said. "Do you?" She thought about it. Years more of legal battles. Headlines. Testimony. For what? Even if they won on technicalities, they'd already lost everything that mattered. "No," she said finally. "I don't." Paul reached across the table, took her hand. This time it was warm. They withdrew the appeals that afternoon. Let the verdict stand. Let history judge. The political world moved on with startling speed. New scandals, new heroes, new villains. Nancy Pelosi became a cautionary tale, then a footnote, then barely mentioned at all. Democrats scrubbed her from their history. Republicans used her as a boogeyman until fresher targets emerged. The woman who'd been the most powerful Democrat in America was erased like a disgraced pharaoh from hieroglyphs. But in certain circles, ethics classes, journalism schools, whistleblower training, her story lived on. Not as she'd want to be remembered, but as a lesson. Power corrupts. Sunshine disinfects. Truth endures. Amanda Torres eventually emerged from protection. She finished law school, passed the bar, and opened a small practice specializing in whistleblower protection. She never spoke publicly about the Pelosi case, but her clients knew. She was the one who'd stood up when it mattered. Marcus Chen left journalism, haunted by his role in the destruction. He taught at Columbia, trying to train the next generation to be better than he was, to find truth without becoming executioners. The Pelosis lived quietly in Pacific Heights. They were spotted occasionally, at restaurants, at the Symphony, walking in Golden Gate Park, always together, always avoiding cameras, always looking like what they were. Old people carrying the weight of fallen empire. Paul died first, a heart attack on a Tuesday morning. He was reading the Financial Times, probably checking stocks he could no longer trade. Nancy found him in his study, peaceful, wearing the same Yale tie he'd worn to her first swearing in. At the funeral, political San Francisco came to pay respects. Not the national figures, they stayed away, but local politicians, old friends, people who remembered when the Pelosis ruled this city like Medicis. Nancy sat in the front row, smaller than ever, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. When they lowered Paul into the ground, she whispered something only she could hear. Christine asked later what she'd said. "Thank you," Nancy replied, "for staying when everyone else left." Nancy lived 2 more years. She spent them sorting papers, organizing her defense of history she knew she'd already lost. She wrote letters to grandchildren, trying to explain without excusing. She died in her sleep on a November night, rain pattering against the windows of the mansion that had housed such dreams and schemes. Her obituary ran on front pages, but below the fold. Nancy Pelosi, first female House Speaker, dies at 86. The headlines mentioned her achievements first, the scandal second. Time had begun its work of softening edges. At her funeral, something unexpected happened. Amy Klobuchar, who distanced herself during the trial, gave a eulogy. Nancy Pelosi was flawed, she said. She fell from grace in spectacular fashion. But before that fall, she shattered glass ceilings. She gave millions of young women belief that they could lead. That legacy, complicated as it is, endures. It was more grace than Nancy had expected, perhaps more than she deserved. But it was something. The Pelosi mansion was sold to a tech executive who gutted it, erasing all traces of its previous owners. The papers were donated to the Library of Congress, sealed for 50 years. The money went to charities, trying to buy redemption that couldn't be purchased. And somewhere in Arlington, Amanda Torres read about Nancy's death over morning coffee. She felt not satisfaction, not vindication, just sadness for what could have been. She'd brought down a giant. But giants, she'd learned, were just people who'd climbed too high to see the ground clearly anymore. The final congressional report on insider trading, issued 2 years after Nancy's death, was damning. The Pelosi case had exposed a vast network of corruption. Dozens of members of Congress were implicated. New laws were passed, then immediately circumvented. Washington had learned from the Pelosi scandal, not to be more ethical, but to be more careful. In San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi's name was quietly removed from buildings, awards, and programs. The woman who'd once been the city's queen became its unmentioned ghost. But in a storage unit in Daly City, Christine Pelosi kept boxes of her mother's things. Photos, letters, the speaker's gavel. Someday, when wounds healed and history gained perspective, maybe there'd be room for nuance. For a story more complex than hero or villain. Or maybe not. Maybe Nancy Pelosi would remain what she'd become, a cautionary tale about power, greed, and the thin line between playing the game and becoming it. In the end, that might be legacy enough. A reminder that in democracy, no one is above the law. Not even those who write it. Especially not those who write it. The rain continued to fall on San Francisco, washing the city clean for new ambitions, new rises, new falls. And in the federal cemetery where Paul lay, and in the Catholic cemetery where Nancy would join him, the earth made no distinction between the powerful and the powerless. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes. All falls end the same way,